All right, good evening, class. This is Felix Obi, Professor Felix Obi. This is Economics 330, Global Trade and Political Economy, Medgar Evers College, City University of New York. Today is Tuesday, November 7th, and we had some preamble to the class and some housekeeping issues, and it's now 6:13, and we are going to start lectures in earnest. So I will just jump right into it. So as you know, this is week 11, and the semester is quickly we're in the back nine of the semester, as we would say in golf. So in today's lecture, we will discuss the role of multinational corporations in international trade. This conversation on multinational corporations is important because they are responsible for a significant portion of goods that are involved in world trade. In today's lecture, and indeed through your assessment for this week, we will discuss some of the pros and cons of multinational corporations, criticisms and praise of multinational corporations, and in particular, we will discuss multinational corporations in the context of international political economy theories and perspectives. For instance, it is helpful to first to understand what we actually mean by multinational corporations. We have to have a framework for the conversation. And hopefully, if you've done any of the readings that are required for this week, this will really just be a rehash of what you've read. So a multinational corporation is a company that has business operations in at least one country other than its home country. By some definitions, multinational companies also generate at least 25% of their revenue outside of their home country. Notably, some multinational corporations have budgets that exceed those of small countries. If you were to think of Facebook really has a budget that exceeds many lower income countries, or ExxonMobil as another example. So one is in energy services and one is in the IT knowledge economy. And yet they have huge bottom lines that is far bigger than most medium income, even some medium income countries. So many multinational corporations are based in developed nations, but they can have positive economic effect on the countries in which they operate. And I say can, especially as multinational companies can make direct investments in foreign countries. Advocates for multinational corporations would argue that they create high-paying jobs and technologically advanced goods in countries that otherwise will not have access to such opportunities or goods. And this can be true. Most people in developing countries who have, quote, great jobs are those that work for multinational companies. So there is an element of truth to that. But every class I try to say that I'm going to throw out a few buzzwords or phrases that would help cement your reputation as a scholar. And the buzzword for today, or phrase for today, is dialectical thinking. Dialectical thinking is that you go beyond seeing issues as black or white, right or wrong, and see the entirety of the issue, the good, the bad, and the different perspectives, and then come to a reasoned conclusion, not an absolute conclusion. So you would say something like, I see the good and I see the bad, but on balance, I think this idea is good or this idea is bad, and here is why. That's when you begin to become an intellectual and you begin to balance this out. So we're going to apply a little bit of dialectical thinking as we talk through multinational corporations. So critics of these enterprises believe multinational corporations exert undue political influence over government, exploit developing nations, and create job losses in their home country. The history of multinational corporations is linked with the history of colonialism. Many of the first multinational companies were commissioned at the behest of European monarchs to conduct international expeditions. So let's think about this very quickly. One quick example that comes to mind of multinational corporations, how they can create job losses, especially in their home country, is if you were to think about what we call the Rust Belt in the United States. So this will stretch, say, from Pennsylvania through Ohio and the steel industrial complex, stretching into parts of Indiana and Chicago. This is where United States used to manufacture steel. Those areas are today called the Rust Belt because those steel factories are now rusting away because all the jobs and the companies, many of them have moved to overseas territories, especially China. So this is how multinationals can distort markets and collapse communities. Now, realize that typically companies with this kind of political heft and financial resources can exert undue influence on the poorer countries where they operate. Doesn't mean that they all do it, but you can see how they would have the means and quite often the motivation to do that. And of course, earlier multinationals were commissioned at the behest of European monarchs to conduct international expeditions. And these earlier multinationals include the East India Company. So the country of India, as we know it now, which also includes Pakistan, which also includes um, Bangladesh, among other countries, were actually run by a multinational corporation called the East India, which the British government commissioned. The Swedish Africa Company that was founded in 1649. By the way, the East India Company was a company founded in 1670, and the Royal Niger Company, which was commissioned in 1879. So there are a host of these. These were the original multinational corporations. The other point to note is that multinational corporations play a crucial role in the transfer of technology and trade in the world. By producing the same quality of goods at lower cost, multinational companies can reduce prices and increase the purchasing power of consumers worldwide. So let's unpack this for a second. And this is kind of what I mean by dialectical thinking. Let's just run through this right quickly. So I said that the steel companies largely left the United States and created what we call the Rust Belt, or what economists call the Rust Belt, in the areas from Pennsylvania all the way through to Chicago, to Illinois, through Ohio, etc. One of the reasons you have to imagine the left was that the goods they were making was expensive and they wanted to stay cost competitive, either so that they can sell to consumers at a lower cost or increase their profit margins, or more than likely, a little bit of both. But the bad news is that to achieve this, and this is the dialectical thinking, so the motivation is hopefully transfer cost savings to consumers, increase margins for shareholders, and hopefully also, as a result of competitive pricing, grow market share and expand markets. But to do this, they are closing factories in the United States, but creating new factories in China where workers, as one example, and it's not just China, as one example, except workers in these lower cost countries make much less than their counterparts would have made in the United States. Although often in these countries, these are still relatively high paying jobs. So that is the complexity of a multinational. On the one hand, they are producing the same quality of goods at a lower cost, so they can reduce prices and thereby increase the purchasing power of their consumers. And here's what that purchasing power really means very quickly. So if you have $10 and an orange costs $5, that means the most you can buy are 2 oranges. But if an orange all of a sudden can be cultivated more cost efficiently and is now sold at $2.50, well, all of a sudden now you can afford 4 oranges. So now your purchasing power has increased. Although your income is still at $10, what you can purchase with that $10 has increased fourfold, at least with twofold, at least with respect to oranges. And that's the argument and the complexity that comes with a multinational corporation. So you don't want to keep looking at issues. I will encourage you not to look at issues as black or white or bright or wrong, but as complex, and try to understand the complexities of the issue. But at the end of that process, it's okay to say on balance, I think the challenges that they create outweighs the benefits, or the benefits outweigh the challenges. And this is really how a scholar thinks. So as such, on the other side of the ledger, there is a trade-off of globalization, right? The price of lower price, the cost of lower prices is that domestic jobs are often gone, and this can increase unemployment in the countries where the home country of these multinational corporations. On the other hand, if you're employed and these companies are making lower price products in a foreign country and importing them back to the United States, well, it will increase your purchasing power because those will be similar quality goods, but at a cheaper price point. So you can buy more of them, you can consume more. So we did say that multinational corporations, and I'm sure you probably found this in your assessment, that multinational corporations can increase foreign direct investment and or portfolio investment. So it is important also then to understand the difference between foreign direct investment, or FDI, or portfolio investment. So a foreign direct investment is just what it says. The money is coming from foreign country, that means an overseas country, and it's coming directly into a specific economy. And this nature of investment implies investment by foreign investors directly into the productive assets of another nation. So this foreign direct investment will maybe invest in a plant that produces widgets. And widgets is X in economics. Whatever it is manufacturers produce is called a widget. And you can use that for whatever it stands for. While a portfolio investment goes into financial assets, such as stocks, bonds in the local entity. So if I were to go to Jamaica and I bought a government stock or a bond, I bought a stock in a company or bought a government bond, that would be a portfolio investment. If I were to go to the same Jamaica and I invested in a plant that produces guitars, then that will be a foreign direct investment. So it is important that we understand that nuanced but critical difference. Note that major decisions that a multinational corporation should consider regarding how it selects and operates in a specific location include, among other things, opportunities for improved efficiency, lower production costs, and eventual larger market share. So there's a little bit of a qualifier here. Up until before COVID, multinational corporations were mostly concerned with improved efficiency, lower production cost, and hopefully this would lead to a larger market share. Just take, for instance, the iPhone or the Samsung phones. The United States is some of their largest markets, if not their largest market. But these products are made overseas, mostly in China and Taiwan, and some in Vietnam. But one of the things, whether it is Apple or Samsung is looking for, is an efficiencies. That is, you got to make it, the number of phones you can make in a minute has to be the highest quality and the fastest that can be made at that quality. That is efficiency in broad strokes. There is also lower production cost, which is why they are in those countries in the first place, because those countries strike a balance between lower production cost and the skills and industrial infrastructure to produce goods efficiently. And when you match these two variables, you generally would have an increasing market share. But I said this was primarily the consideration for multinationals before COVID. One of the things that COVID laid to bear for multinationals was the inefficiencies in the global supply chain and how the global supply chain seized up, how the world was at the mercy of, say, the manufacturing capital of the world, which is China. We were at the mercy of China's COVID policy. They locked down China, we couldn't get goods and services because they just weren't making them and there was no way to get them to us. So increasingly, manufacturers and multinational companies are now also looking at what they call supply chain resilience, which is they're looking for locations that may not, on balance, be the cheapest location or even the most efficient location, but is a location that hedges against any disruptions in the international supply chain, which is why today Mexico is not US largest trading partner rather than China. And this is an effort to hedge against global supply chain and disruptions, because Mexico is just across the border and it's easier to manage that relationship than all the way in China. In fact, many Chinese firms are setting up in Mexico and supplying the US market. So Chinese firms are outsourcing the production of some of their goods and services to Mexico to service the US market. That's globalization for you. So the first US jobs went to China, and now Chinese jobs are going to Mexico, some, and to service the US consumer. Another significant strategy of MNC is transfer pricing. So transfer pricing is under significant, it's one of those phrases that is also important to know and be aware of. That is when corporate tax rates differ among countries. Multinational corporations have an incentive to set its transfer price in a way that reduces its tax burden by reporting higher profits in the country where corporate profits are taxed more lightly. What this means in simple English is you would hear conversations, if you work in the international global business field, about having a minimum tax, global minimum tax for multinational corporations, so that whichever country that you do business in, that's the minimum tax that country can charge you. And here is why that's important. What can happen sometimes is that if you were to look at Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, there are two Irelands, Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland. If you were to look at the Republic of Ireland, you would notice very quickly that many multinational corporations, blue chip multinational corporations, are headquartered in Republic of Ireland. There's a simple reason why they do that. The tax rate in the Republic of Ireland is lower than most European Union countries. So it is it makes sense for these companies to say, hey, although we sold more phones in Germany and France and the UK, when the UK used to be part of the EU, although we sold more products there, goods and services there, we are actually headquartered in Ireland. So we are going to recognize our revenue in Ireland and pay Irish tax, which is lower than they would have paid if they were headquartered in Germany or in France. This is an advantage for Ireland, obviously, because Ireland would, no matter how that it, although they have lower taxes, but that's a revenue the state had no right to expect, except for the fact that they have lower taxes. But this also creates a conundrum for the global community. This is the dialectical thinking. This runs the risk of starting a race to the bottom. And here's what I mean by that. The rational thing for any other country in the European Union to do, from a realist perspective, going back to classes from a few weeks ago, would be to set their tax rate at the same rate or lower than Ireland. Sooner or later, somebody would say, now I got to go lower to even attract more companies. And this begins a race to the bottom. Realize that each time you set your tax rates too low, that's, all things being equal, less revenue for the government. And the less revenue a government has, the less capacity the government has to provide public service. So it becomes a race to the bottom and everybody gets poorer, which is why many countries led by the United States, and especially the United States, is advocating for a global minimum corporate tax. So that even if this race to the bottom starts, you can only go but so low, because by law, no country shall charge. Should this come into effect, no country can charge a tax rate that is lower than this percentage. So this, again, is part of the dialectical thinking and thinking through the issues all the way around and seeing the unintended consequences of a policy position. So while in isolation, Ireland is saying to the Republic of Ireland is saying to itself, we don't have the technological capacity of Germany, and we don't have the heritage of France or Italy. And by heritage, I mean the Gucci's, the cognacs. These are heritage products. Cognac, of course, in France, and I think Gucci is in Italy, I believe. Yes, the House of Gucci. Ireland doesn't have that, so it has to figure out a way to compete. So it reduces its taxes, but the unintended consequences that it could start a race to the bottom. And again, this is all part of the full dialectical thinking. The other is to obviously, and I touched on this a little bit, to differentiate between perspectives of liberals, realists, and historical materialists when it comes to analyzing MNC, which is really what I touched on right now. Recall that I said that the realist would say, okay, now I have to at least match Ireland, or maybe even go lower. The temptation is that the next country would want to even go lower, and then it becomes a race to the bottom. The liberal perspective would say, rather than each country working aggressively to achieve its national objectives, which often has the unintended consequence of a countermeasure by other countries, in this case, the price war can lead to a race to the bottom in tax revenue and less ability to fund public service. The liberals will say, why don't we strengthen the international political economy and the rules-based system that undergird it, to say that we would have a minimum tax rate that no country shall go below. So that would be part of that tug of war in the theoretical perspectives of seeing, viewing the transactions that happens as a result of international political economy. So lastly, There are a number of ways multinational corporations can expand. Actually, there are two significant ways they can expand their international operations. One is horizontal integration. Two, or the other, is vertical integration. The difference, of course, being that horizontal integration is when a business grows by acquiring similar companies in their industry at the same point in the supply chain. Whereas vertical integration is when a business expands by acquiring another company that operates before or after them in the supply chain. So I'm going to keep this very simple. A horizontal integration is sort of like when ShopRite buys Aldi. They are at the same point, at the same level in the value chain. They are both front customer-facing grocery chains. So it will be horizontal integration because you're just growing your number of stores and you're growing your customer base and you're growing perhaps the number of states where you have operations. But it's horizontal. Vertical would be if ShopRite were to buy Tyson's Chicken. Tyson's Chicken is below front-facing businesses in the value chain. So instead of having somebody, in this case, Tyson's Chicken, supplying your poultry, you're actually buying the company that makes the poultry. So you are effectively a sub branch of your business is growing the chicken that another branch of your business is selling to retailers or end user. So that's vertical integration, right? So it's when a business expands by acquiring another company that operates before or after them in the supply chain. So the supply chain is that you got to grow the chicken, kill the chicken, then ship the chicken to a grocery store that now sells it to the consumer. So that's a value chain. If you buy Tyson's Farm, well, you've just done a vertical integration. So this is this week's week 11's conversation on multinational corporations in a nutshell. And of course, next week, we will focus on international economic development. And that is part of my grad school thesis. And that's actually a part of international political economy that I have a lot of excitement about and that I think the class should find a lot of value. That said, I see that I have a question. Okay. That said, any questions?
No, Professor.
Excellent. So I am going to take it that we've had an excellent office hour and lecture. I am, of course, available by email, and I wish you a lovely rest of your evening, and be well, and good luck to everyone, those who are here live and those who will be watching the video of the lecture. I wish you good luck with your week's assessment. Take care.
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.